Right, but you can't eat that anyway.
You can't eat it anyways, but it's not the prohibition of milk and meat. It's only the prohibition of eating non-kosher. Okay, so today's class is, with no further ado, presenting on one side milk and meat. The great battle of milk and meat tonight. We all know famous verse in the Torah. It says it 3 times actually in the Torah. Do not eat milk and meat. It's 3 different verses. Exactly the same words in each one. Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook a baby goat in its mother's milk, like we quoted before. And the question is, why does it need to say 3 separate times the exact same verse? We get it. Don't eat a goat in its mother's milk. So the Talmud extrapolates this that there's actually 3 biblical prohibitions within milk and meat. One of them is eating. Right, exactly. Eating cheeseburgers. One of them is a prohibition of eating. You cannot eat milk and meat together. That's prohibition number 1. Prohibition number 2 is you cannot even cook milk and meat together. This is an important one because biblically, you're not allowed to, independent of eating it, you're not even allowed to cook milk and meat together, which would mean that if you were a professional chef, I don't think this applies to anyone here as far as I know, but if you are a professional chef, there could be a potential problem with working in a non-kosher restaurant, because you're not allowed to cook, just like you can't eat it, the same thing, you're not allowed to cook milk and meat that is together, separate from eating it. Theoretically, this could also apply, let's say you have a coworker, again, this would only apply by kosher meat, and not necessarily slaughter properly, I mean a kosher variation meat, like beef, and cow beef, and does beef mean cow? Is that by definition? Yeah. Right? Fine, so beef with cheese. So if your coworker says, hey, take this and heat it up for me, and it's a cheeseburger sandwich, so if it was already cooked together once, then maybe it's not so bad the second time, but if you're the first one cooking it for even a non-Jewish friend, you're not supposed to cook milk and meat together independent of eating it. And number 3, you find the craziest images online when you look for them. You're not allowed to benefit from milk and meat. What does it mean, benefit from milk and meat? So you can't sell. Let's say you shouldn't own a restaurant.
Like a cheeseburger operation, like a fast food place.
Or you
exactly.
Buy a cheeseburger and sell it to someone.
Or you should buy it and sell it to someone else. Exactly. And also, let's say you by accident cooked milk and meat in your house, and milk spilled in something. You call the rabbi, and the rabbi says, it's milk and meat. You got to get rid of it. So you can't give it to your dog, right? Because giving food to your dog is a benefit to you, because now you don't have to, feed him his dog food. You save yourself $3, right? So benefiting your dog is actually benefiting you. So if you would create the biblical milk and meat, you're not allowed to even benefit from it. You have to just toss it out. Now, what's important, back to what Mark was asking before, is that when we get to rabbinical milk and meat, this is too much, you can forget it. It's only because you asked. When the rabbis forbade, let's say, chicken and milk, or chicken and cheese, they only forbade it in eating. But you were allowed to cook it and benefit from it, which means if you want to start a restaurant of chicken and cheese sandwiches, so theoretically there's no problem with that, right? And same with if you want to heat up a chicken and cheese sandwich for anyone, also not a problem. Rabbinical milk and meat is only a problem by eating. So that's probably the main difference. And again, the most popular thing that comes up probably is eating. I don't know how common it is that cooking or benefiting from comes up. In terms of, we're talking about it, in terms of stocks, it's only called benefiting from if it's your company enough to the fact that you can make decisions regarding it. Rabbi Feinstein has an interesting response. Let's say you want to own stocks in McDonald's or whatever it is, that you're benefiting from the dividends of milk and meat, right? That's where it's coming from. If you're just like a small, unimportant person that you own 20 stocks at McDonald's, unless you own a majority of stocks and therefore your voice is actually valued to the company, it is not a problem of benefiting from it. So that's why in most cases it's not going to make a big difference. Yeah.
You said earlier non-kosher, it doesn't matter.
Non-kosher meat you're allowed to benefit from. There's no problem with that. If you want to...
Not like McDonald's doesn't have...
Well, so the problem is non-kosher meat means non-kosher animals.
Okay.
If you have beef, you have a cow meat, and it was not slaughtered properly, so therefore it wouldn't be kosher to be eaten, it could still fall under the category of milk and meat in terms of benefiting from it, or not necessarily. If it actually comes up, you could ask Rabbi, variations apply, but that's the general rule. So the main, obviously, aspect that we're going to focus on in terms of milk and meat is eating milk and meat. Now, you can't eat milk and meat together. That is independent of how it was cooked. Let's say you want to just have a hamburger and then on the side have fries and nacho cheese, right? So you're not in the same sandwich. You're having a hamburger on one side, and you're having next to it dairy food. So you're not supposed to eat them at the same time, even if they're not in the same exact sandwich, right? Any form of eating them together, the same would apply also, let's say you cooked a dairy product, like we spoke last time, this is where it's going to come up again, the concept called ta'am, or flavor, taste. The taste of an item is as primary as the item itself, which means, like we said last time, that if I cook meat in a pot, the flavor can stay inside of that pot, and therefore if I cook milk in it afterwards, that could be the same problem, even though there's no actual milk and meat together again, right? There's different situations where you're not cooking the milk and meat in real life together, but if the flavor is there, or even if you're just washing out a hamburger with a cup of milk, all of these things are going to create a problem. And in order to ensure that we don't come to eating milk and meat together, there are certain safeguards in place to make sure that we don't come to eating milk and meat together. So now, there's two potential scenarios. You could either eat milk and then eat meat, or you could eat meat and then eat milk. Right? The two theoretical potential scenarios. Assuming we're not eating them together, that we established, officially in kosher, you can't eat them together. So what happens, and I want to eat one right after the other? Yeah.
When you say milk, you mean all dairy, right?
Milk is all dairy, yeah.
Okay.
What do you mean to include? Like cottage cheese or cheeses or
Just anything. I just want to make sure I'm following.
if it's actually has dairy products inside of it, it'll apply the rules of dairy. Yeah. So to safeguard not coming to eat milk and meat together, there's certain guidelines of even milk right after meat or meat right after milk, how we go about eating it. So let's just start with the simple scenario. Milk, let's say, to bring Mark's example, we take a chocolate bar on your way home from work. So you take a chocolate bar on your way out, and you're eating it on your way home. You come home for dinner, and you see your wife made you, or your future wife made you, chicken stew, or a beef stew, either way, right? So now, you just ate milk 5 seconds ago, and now you would like to eat meat. So, what do we do?
You have to wait a certain amount of time.
Denise says you have to wait.
Can
1 hour.
Stan rules 1 hour.
But different people hold different things.
Yeah,
'Cause technically, you could bench and clean your mouth.
Bench and clean your mouth.
How about drinking vodka? And then
Drinking vodka like a real Russian. I love it. Yeah, you could always drink vodka, even if it's nothing to do with milk and
you
meat.
want to clean the system and eat everything.
Start again. Okay, burn it out. Besides,
Burn it
Stan
out,
is saying, don't just drink it out, burn it out.
Not just carb.
Vodka is definitely parv. So again, we're starting with milk and going to meat. Now we're going to discover in a second what Denise is referring to. It's a famous concept called waiting time, right? And we're going to get there in a second. Waiting time in general is when you first ate meat, and now you want to go and eat milk. For example, you had a Friday night Shabbat dinner. Now, if you want to have ice cream for dessert, that's not soy ice cream, that's actual dairy ice cream. That would be a problem because, like Denise mentioned, we normally wait between meat and milk, and we'll get back to that momentarily. But now, let's talk about the opposite direction. You're starting with milk, and you're going to meat. So, from milk to meat, there's no waiting time. However, we're concerned that there is some milky residue staying in your mouth. You have, the chocolate stuff stayed in your mouth or something stuck there. So there's a 3-part process of how to clean out your mouth. Part number 1. What's he doing? Anyone?
Eating something hard.
Eating a cracker. There we go. Eating a cracker. I have no clue what episode these are from, but he is eating a cracker. There's no rule it has to be a cracker. You're supposed to eat a salad. Eat something solid that's not supposed to be officially flour, dates, or vegetables that are things that get stuck in your mouth and they don't clean them out well. Like if you eat a date, and the date itself is gooey, so that's not going to clean your mouth that well. But if you eat a cracker or a piece of bread or like anything like that, so then that will help clean your mouth. That's step number 1. Eat something. Step number 2 is
Drink something.
drink something. Very good, right? Eat something and drink something. There's a famous custom Friday night in many people's houses that sometimes you have fish, and then before the fish, you go to the meal, you take a l'chaim. It's like the opportune time for l'chaims. So this actually comes from the fact that there's we're not talking about this tonight, but between fish and meat, there's a different thing between fish and meat, but the same thing between milk and meat, that custom actually originates with milk and meat, and you're supposed to drink something between milk and meat. So I guess they had some Russians that decided you shouldn't just drink it, you should burn it out, and therefore there became a custom to have a l'chaim between it. But there's no real reason to have a l'chaim. The point is that you eat something and you drink something. And the last stage is you wash your hands. Now, if you're eating with a fork, so then you don't have to wash your hands. Don't use the same fork again. We'll get to that in a second, having different utensils for milk and meat. But let's say you're eating like sushi or something like that, and you just, you pick it up with your hand because you're eating sushi. If the women are going to all give me dirty looks now, but some of us sometimes, we pick up food with our hands. So if you ate it with your hands, and then you're concerned, or even just, you put a little bit on, whatever reason, if it touches your hands, so then you're supposed to, pizza for example, that's a good example, you're supposed to wash your hands also. That one's only if it applies. The other two, eat and drink something, is across the board. So again, you had milk, you had a chocolate bar, you had a milkshake, you had some kind of dairy food. You get home, you want to eat supper. There's no need to wait. Not necessary. Just got to make sure that your mouth was cleaned from the milk, that residue that can remain inside of it. So eat something, you drink something, and wash your hands if necessary. Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I was taught that if you ate something dairy with bread, if you ate a certain amount of bread with it, you had to bench. Is that not true?
In terms of, you mean before you start the meat meal?
So if not at the same.
You mean not eating the same meal? So what we can talk about. There's a Zohar, Kabbalah, that says that you should never eat milk and meat in the same meal. So there is a source to that. For example, on Shavuos, right, the holiday of Shavuos, holiday of receiving the Torah, there's a custom across the Jewish nation to eat milk, cheesecake, and yogurts. I eat milk meals. Now, what a lot of people will do in this meal, this is a valid custom, is that they'll wash, because there's a problem here. People want to have milk because that's customary. People also want to have meat because it's a festive meal, and what's a festive meal with you're having tuna melt? A festive meal is steaks, right? So people want to have both. Some people will do is they'll wash, they'll have a little dairy appetizer. They'll then rinse their mouth out and eat something. Those two could be in any order. I put it 1 or 2, but that's because something has to be 1 and something has to be 2. But eat something, drink something, and then they'll carry on with their meal, not separating it. There are those that dispute that custom because they say you should never have them in the same meal. But that is definitely not like the letter of the law. It comes from Kabbalistic origins, and those that have that custom, great. Nothing wrong with it. It's a great custom. But there definitely are a lot of people that say that as long as you separate between the milk and the meat, that's not a problem. So, okay, so that's when you're going from milk to meat.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So,
Do you want me to go back or?
No. So, for instance, during Kiddush, I just assume everything is parve. All the desserts and everything.
Yeah.
Is
It's a
it?
valid assumption, yeah.
Well,
Everything at Kiddush, everything is for sure not milk, not dairy. Everything is meat. The only thing to be wary of at Kiddush is, we kind of hinted at this a second ago, is that there's a concept of not eating fish and meat together. And at Kiddushes, a lot of times they'll have fish, whoever was here this past Shabbos, so we have them set up on different tables. If you know how Rabbi Moshe sets them up, the middle table has all the meat on it, and the fish will be on the side table. That's because the Gemara. It's not a prohibition in the Torah. The Gemara says that it's dangerous to eat fish and meat together. So because that we avoid it, and the process between fish and meat, and here there's no order. You can go fish, meat, fish. It's not a mixing problem. Is we do the same thing between fish and meat. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to eat something, drink something, and if you touch it with your hands, wash your hands off. So that's the only thing kind of to be wary of at Kiddushes. But most people will never serve milk and meat at the same meal.
Will never be there dairy. You know how restaurants they're either milk or meat.
Right.
So to be kosher, does the shul, and this could just be so silly of a question.
All questions are good questions. I disagree with the premise.
Just do one or the other there?
the shul always had, the oratory, what oratory had was they used to have two kitchens. They had a meat kitchen and a milk kitchen. They had two totally separate kitchens. They realized that they never used the milk kitchen because what do you ever use milk kitchen for? It's always meat on Shabbos. Once every 5 months, they would make a bris or something in the shul. Someone would want lox and bagels, and it was all cold anyways. So they basically rented that out to someone else, and they don't really do milk events there from the kitchen. Now, basically, it's just generally, they very rarely have milk events in the shul. If they do, though, it's generally cold, like cream cheese, and it comes in platters from Tom Thumb, and you don't really use the kitchen. But for sure, the DK or most kosher organizations, they would not allow one restaurant to have both parts of it. It's just
it'd be too easy to mix.
It'd be too easy to mix up, and again, also you're employing a lot of times non-Jewish chefs who don't really know, and you have to have a mashkiach who's watching, and there's so much room for error. Generally, if you want to have both things, you have to have two totally independent kitchens, and then they totally exist independently, even if they're, let's say, next door to each other or something like that. But they'll be functioning independently. So, yeah. Great question. Let's go the other direction now. Everyone knows the word fleish? Fleish is, I think it's Yiddish for meat, but it's often I hear people talking good words to accustom yourself with is fleischig and milchig, or fleischig and milchig. Pronunciation thing depending on where you're from in Europe. None of us are from anywhere. But fleischig and milchig. Fleischig means meaty, and milchig means milky in Yiddish. So fleisch literally means like meat. So let's say you go in the opposite direction. Let's say you had a delicious Shabbos meal, and you prepared beautiful, and you had great chicken, or you had chicken, beef, you have a nice cholent, some good beef stew, and you go home and you're just in the mood for ice cream. You don't have any parv ice cream at home, and it doesn't taste as good as dairy one, so you want dairy ice cream. So now, what is the law? So this creates what Rabbi what's his name? Rabbi Orlovsky. He's like a really fun rabbi. I don't know if you heard of him or not, but he has the whole shiur about fleishophobia, where people have this fear of ever becoming fleishig because, like we mentioned, there's a custom to wait after meat to milk. It's like I don't want to get fleishig. I don't want to get fleishig. Like, milchik, that's like the. But in real life, it's not so bad. You can become fleishig. It'll pass. What do we got to do when we're fleishig?
Wait 6 hours.
Different custom.
We wait 3 hours.
Days and days and days and days. The times. Don't stare at a pot, right, when you want to boil. Anyways, you have to wait 6 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours.
My family's always 6.
His family's always 6.
My family eats cheeseburgers to
So 0 hours.
my family doesn't.
Cheeseburger.
No,
That's German.
So
Jackie's at 3 hours.
so again, we're creating a safeguard here to not eat milk and meat at the same time. That's really the problem here. So because of that, there's different customs as to what exactly the safeguard is. The general mainstream Ashkenazi ruling is we wait 6 hours. That is definitely the standard. There are other customs. Some people wait 3 hours. Some people wait 1 hour. Some people wait different things. For sure, if someone's like sick or something like that, and like they need milk quicker, you could be lenient on these things. But in general, the generally accepted custom is 6 hours. And the reason for this is that when you eat meat leaves more of like a oily or fatty residue around your mouth and in your throat. And because of that, there's a custom that even that shouldn't mix with milk when you're eating it. So because of that, we wait generally 6 hours between milk and meat. This would be meat and milk. This would be even if you just chewed the meat and then decided you don't want it anymore, or even if you ate part of a parv, so that's like a cholent, for example. So your cholent's composed of many parts. You have the meat, you have potatoes, you have beans, you have barley, you have kishka. If it all cooked together, even if you just eat a potato from the cholent, that would still make you fleishig. Or even a potato from it, and even if you just chewed on the piece of meat, I don't think if you chewed on the potato that would be true, but if you chewed on the piece of meat, then any of these things will require you to now wait 6 hours. If for whatever reason you're not waiting 6 hours, let's say you're not holding by that religiously, or you're just sick, or whatever the reason is in unique situations, then there is still, it's no worse than milk and then meat. Meaning, for sure, you might as well also still eat something, drink something, and wash your hands, right? Because inherently distinguishing between milk and meat is an advantage. And by specifically for meat to milk, even if you just separate them, here's where the more of the rabbis agree that you should not eat them in the same meal. If you ate meat first, if you even then bench, you end your meal, and you start a new meal of milk, you've already accomplished a lot in the world of halacha literature, even if you weren't to wait six hours. So definitely a good starting point is to just not eat them together, end your meal, start another meal, and then eat something, drink something, go to milk. But definitely the mainstream Ashkenazi custom is to wait 6 hours. Now, something that David mentioned before is that there's a concept called hard cheese. Now, what exactly is hard cheese? So if you want, I forgot to bring the book. I'll have a picture of it on a slide later. There's a lot of places you can find lists of what's considered hard cheese or soft cheese. Hard cheese, since it's very generally strong and potent, will also require waiting 6 hours. It's not so common if you look at the list of what's called hard cheese. Hard cheese that's melted is considered soft cheese. It has to be hard cheese, according to some people, that is aged. So there's a lot of variations to what exactly to qualify as hard cheese. I can either give you a list online, or I'll show you a picture of a book afterwards that I just recommend for general kashrus questions. That it's most of the cheeses that they have, I'm not even familiar with what these cheeses are. Maybe you have more of a cheese connoisseur that would know it. But the classic cheeses generally are not hard cheese. But if you have hard cheese, it's important to know that we accept that also to be strong and to leave this kind of like acidy residue in your mouth, which would also require you to wait 6 hours. Now let's say we mentioned the concept, it keeps coming up again, called tam, flavor. So let's say I cooked meat in a pot. So now there's meat flavor in this pot, right? I'm not allowed to cook milk in this pot now, because there's meat flavor in this pot. Let's say I cook noodles in this pot now. Something totally parv, something that has not a question of mixing milk and meat, just something totally parv. There's no meat. I first cooked meat, put it in my fridge, scrubbed the pot clean. It's totally clean now, and I now cook noodles in this pot. So if I eat these noodles, there's no necessity to wait 6 hours. Right? You only have to wait 6 hours for either eating meat or eating a food that was cooked with meat. But if you're just eating a flavor of meat doesn't require you to wait 6 hours. It has to be either meat or something cooked with meat. Okay, now that's basically the basics of, I think, eating milk and meat, separating between them. Any questions or anything about from milk to meat, from meat to milk and meat together?
Do you do 6 hours?
I personally wait 6 hours, yeah. I wait 6 hours. My custom, he's mentioned German Jews do 3. Some other customs brought down. Some people say you could do into the 6 hour, like 5 in a minute. Some people will say you do 5.5. There's like a lot of different customs out there, but definitely I do 6, and most I think mainstream Ashkenazi Jews do 6. Okay, milk and meat utensils. There it goes. Milk and meat utensils. So because we mentioned in the past that there's a thing called tam, a thing called flavor, right? So flavor remains behind in a pot. If you cook something in a pot, there's meat flavor in this pot now. The same would apply with forks and knives and stuff, right? They become meaty. So because of that, we can't use milk and meat utensils for everything because they'll have milk and meat flavor in them. So because of that, there's a custom to have two different pots, 2 different pans, 2 different silverwares. And not only that, but there's a custom to make them distinguishably different. It used to be back in the day, that's what there's pictures of, they used to have all of the milk ones had a hole at the end of them. If you go to like the yeshiva I learned in Israel called the Mir, you'll notice clearly they have, it's the biggest yeshiva in the world, there's probably like 4,000 or 5,000 people there. So they're nervous, they're somewhere they serve 3 meals a day, sometimes milk, sometimes meat. You're nervous, these things could just get mixed up. All of their milk silverware has a hole at the end of it, and all of their meat silverware is solid at the end of it. So therefore, you always know if you find one with a circle in it during your meat meal, everyone will know, this is a mistake, let's give this back to the kitchen and tell them we found it in the wrong place and let them deal with it, but I definitely shouldn't use it. Because it's a clearly recognizable sign that everyone will know this is milk, this is meat. So you're not obligated to, take all your fancy cutlery and pierce them all and make problems, but you should have two distinguishably different sets of silverware. They don't have to be blue and red. That was just for the effect. It could both be stainless steel or whatever you use. Just say, so when you see it, you should readily recognize, oh, this is my meat one, this is my milk one. Yeah.
I was going to say, what if you use one?
Oh.
You have to bury it outside and heat it.
Well, no, I meant-
You have to eulogize it all, so you can't just bury it. It needs a proper Jewish burial, you
Like,
know?
say, like, you're grabbing and you, like, somehow, like, make
Yeah,
a mistake
that happens
and
all
grab
the time.
wrong one.
All the time. That happens all the time. So, it depends on what you did with it. That's really the question. If you used it for hot, if you used it for cold, if you cut something sharp with it, there's a lot of variables to that. It gets very technical. I wasn't planning on discussing it this class. It could be the next class, a week from tonight. I hope to discuss. It's probably the most important in terms of this practical. I mean, it'll use the information we've learned already in the past too. I'm not saying it's the only one worth coming to. But next class we're going to hopefully go through each part of the kitchen and just explain how to use it for milk and meat independently together. Your oven, your stove, your microwave, your toaster. And these things will come up then. If you did use one for the wrong thing, first of all, you should know that happens to everyone all the time. We had a big question in my own house tonight. We can talk about the details of it later. But a few non-kosher items lying around nowadays. And it depends on a bunch of variables. If it's cold, generally cold won't transfer anything. So let's say you took a meat spoon and you ate your yogurt with it, or you ate your milk and cereal with it. So nothing is going to transfer because it's cold. All you have to do then is just wash it and scrub it well and put it on the side. But let's say you accidentally stirred your macaroni and cheese with a meaty knife, so that would be a problem because it's hot and could get in. And we'll talk at the end of this class how to, just an introduction kind of to how to make things kosher that became not kosher. But it would depend on a bunch of variables. And the best idea with that is call a rabbi, text me, text Rabbi Kleiner, and I'll say, this is what I did. And is it a problem? Is it not a problem? But it just depends on a lot of variables. So again, you should have two different cutlery, pots, pans. All these things absorb flavor, and because they absorb flavor, you really have to have two of them. Not only should you have two of these, this is like, you can't really have a kosher kitchen unless you have two sets of cutlery or pots and pans, because it'll absorb the taste. As a recommended just addition, it's wise that anything that comes on the table, for sure, once you have kids, it just often gets into the food. Your ketchup just ends up touching the pizza or the cheese It's recommended that to have two sets of, salt and pepper shakers or ketchups or anything you bring to the table. I think in the kitchen generally, the wives are more careful about these things and they don't fall into the soup most of the time. But at the table, people often just pour the ketchup a little too close to the pizza, and you're basically sticking it into the milk pizza. Now when you're pouring this onto your cholent or whatever you're using it for, you're going to have that milky, cheesy residue on it. So again, this is not a halacha, this is not a law. This is more of like a recommendation to avoid issues, is like things that you bring on your table, salt, pepper, ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, I don't know, whatever your family likes to eat. It's wise to have two of them. Another interesting law that a lot of people don't know about is that there's a prohibition of making bread that's either meat or dairy. Meaning, when you're making a dough, you shouldn't make it a milky dough to make milchik bread, because since bread has always been the staple of the human diet, and people naturally take bread and they'll eat it with their yogurt, and they'll eat it with their hamburger, and they'll eat it with their chili, and they'll eat it with everything. So we're concerned that if you have bread that's actual milk in it, you're going to end up eating that with something that's meat. I actually found online a picture of challah with meat in it. How cool was that? That's like the randomest picture. It does. It's like a meatloaf with a challah dough. If you want the recipe, I could probably find it. But I don't think anyone really wants to. I was just wondering how they braided it, because it can't be actually braided, right? How'd they do that? Anyways, okay, we'll save this for our Talmudic discussions, right? But there is a prohibition of having meat and dairy bread, which leads us to the big question of how do you make pizza? Pizza is probably the greatest invention of all time. No, I'm just kidding. But it's definitely a dairy bread, right? So how is that permissible? So there are definitely there's basically three rules to this generality. You can't make meat and dairy breads. If you're making a small amount just for the day, something like that, that's totally fine. You want to make a nice meal for your spouse or something, and you want to have, when you mix gravy into the bread, it makes it really tasty. You're cooking just enough for the dinner tonight, that's for sure fine. Another reason why it would be allowed is, let's say it has a unique look to it. If you make bread like this, so this bread, everyone's going to assume that you can use milk or meat, right? No one would ever know. But let's say you make it in some kind of weird shape. So now that's a sign to you that you'll know now that that is something that is either meat or dairy, whatever you did to it. The other rule is if it has cheese or meat sitting on top of it, like for example a pizza. No one's going to look at a pizza and think you could eat it with meat. It's covered in cheese. Right? That's pretty obvious. So there's no concern so that you can openly see the meat or milk. That's also not a problem. And also, if you first have bread like this, let's say you have bread like this, and you make grilled cheese. So why now it's milky bread, right? So the answer is no. It's only in the cooking process. It's when you cook the dough and you made the bread with milk or meat, that could be a problem. But other than that, it would be fine. Again, just another kosher idea to put out there. Which leads us to the big question. How is that possible? Dun, dun, dun.
Because they maybe don't, because you have like bread that just, instead of using like milk, uses like water or something?
Totally. So here's a question. Look at this kosher symbol. There's a point to know. You'll find a kosher symbol often. There's another little letter next to it. I don't know if you ever noticed that before. You have an OU, an OK, a CRC, and sometimes there'll be a D next to it, a P next to it. So if there's a D next to the symbol, that normally stands for OU dairy. That's what that D is doing there. You'll sometimes find a P, which will stand for sometimes Passover, sometimes Parv. Be careful with that because just because it's Parv doesn't mean that it's going to be good for Passover. But so this is bread, seemingly. Thomas is English muffins, classic, and it has OUD on it. OUD would seem to imply that it is dairy, which would be an inherent problem for a kosher organization to call any bread kosher and dairy is like a contradiction in terms. You can't have dairy bread, like we just said. So the truth is that Thomas's English muffins and probably all other bread that you'll find on it that has D next to it is actually not milchik at all. It's not milk. There's a minute amount of milk in it. There's a concept called bittul, or nullification, where the amount of something inside is so minute that it's considered insignificant in the eyes of the Torah.
This is what you talked about with eggs last week, right?
Right. That was one application. So the general rule is 1 in 60, which is like 1.6%. We'll go just call it 1.5%. And if it's less than 1.5% of it, so it's considered halakhically not there. The world of Torah, it's considered like it's not there. So Thomas's English muffins happen to have a very minute amount of dairy in them, which halakhically is not considered milky at all, which means you can even take this and put a hamburger inside of it if you want it. Even though it has the OUD there, it is halakhically totally not dairy. Now, you should never assume that when you find a product that has a D on it that you could do this, but here it happens to be true by Thomas's English muffins, and it has to be the case if you call up the OU, because how else could you have dairy bread? So next time you see dairy bread, you'll realize this is probably what's going on. Is there's a minute amount. The other possibility is that it could be run on in a machine that had a previous run of dairy. And they'll often write a D for that also, which they used to have dairy equipment, a DE, dairy equipment, which means there's no dairy in it itself, but it was on an equipment that uses dairy also, or they stopped that, so it could mean that also. But here, it just means a minute amount. So you could have your Thomas English muffins with your breakfast burger. Not a problem. Okay, so that really, as far as I know, takes care of all of the basic rules of milk and meat. If any other questions, please ask. There are a lot of questions in terms of how the intermixing and the problems that arise between milk and meat. We'll discuss that a little bit more next week. And a lot of that is really very technical, and if anyone's interested in it, we could definitely go through it in more detail, or just, it's a lot of information and hard to kind of get it all at once, but I'm open to anything. The next thing, you have two sets of silverware, 2 sets of pots. There's a concept called Tavila's Kalim, which means immersing vessels in a mikvah. Right? When you buy a new vessels, you're supposed to immerse them in the mikvah. Now, most mikvahs, you'll see this is the building on Mikshan, 5640 Mikshan. That's the the mikvah. This is the main entrance to the mikvah. In this gate over here, we'll get a little closer here. This is a close-up of this gate over there. To the yard, when you walk in this gate right over here against the outside of the building, you'll find an additional mikvah there that is meant for vessels, right? That you buy a new pot. You're supposed to stick the pot in the mikvah. You don't go into the main mikvah for it. You put it in a special mikvah on the side for it. And you're supposed to do that with any new vessel that you buy. We'll talk in a minute the restrictions on that. Just a sensitivity issue. Often women will be going to the mikvah at night. So generally we go to do the vessels during the daytime when you know no one's going to be around, just out of sensitivity towards that. Now, what vessels need... Oh, one more thing before that. This is a picture of the Kosher Kitchen from Rabbi Benjamin Forrest. It's a great book. It's a great guide. He has lists in it of all of the important lists, like, hard cheese, which vessels need to be going to the mikvah, which don't, which ones you can make kosher if it became non-kosher, which ones you can't. It's a great resource. If you ever want a book to go from the beginning to everything, it is a little intense. It's not such a beginner's guide. It's only probably when you're at the stage where you want to really know everything. This is a very comprehensive book, and it's very, very good. If you're looking for something more, just an intro on a more basic level, I could recommend other things. But just for this specific message, only certain materials need to go in the mikvah when you buy them. Those are basically metal, glass, Pyrex, crystal, those types of materials, specifically metals and other materials that melt down. That's where the underlying factors, such as glasses. Other materials that don't need to go in would be like rubber, wood, stone, earthenware. Those all would not require going in the mikvah. If anyone didn't know this law, and you say, I've been using these vessels the past 10 years, it doesn't do anything to your food. Your food will be equally kosher or not kosher if you use them. However, you can still go now, put them in the mikvah. It doesn't matter that you haven't until now. There's nothing lost by going ahead and doing it now. Again, if you want if there's multiple parts, let's say you have something that's partially wood and partially metal. So these are, again, very technical aspects of halacha. Depends which one's primary, which one's not. Does it touch the food? A few other variables. I would just text either a picture or call someone and describe it. A rabbi, and he'll just tell you if you need it or not. Again, for a list, I have a list here actually. If you want, take it home. It's not in the book. Again, it'll go through every single thing you possibly have in your kitchen. It'll tell you yes or no. Or again, you could just ask, but it's too long to go through them all straight. Now, which types of things? Let's say it's the right material. Let's say it's metal, so it needs to go in the mikvah. Does every single metal item need to go in the mikvah or not? So the answer is not every single thing. Only things that come in direct contact with food need to go into the mikvah. So let's say you have cutlery. Cutlery are generally metal, so they should go in the mikvah. Let's say you have, for example, a corkscrew. Corkscrews generally do not touch. They're not used in the process of contact with food. Use it for a bottle opener, use it for a wine opener, but they're not going to actually come in contact with food. Things that don't come in contact with food do not need to go in the mikvah. And for example, also, let's say you have a bread machine. So the bread machine has a electric part. There's a metal insert that the dough actually goes in. Only the metal insert, or a toaster, only the racks that the food actually touches needs to go in the mikvah. If you have another part of the machine, that doesn't need to go in the mikvah because that's not touching your food. Only things that touch your food need to go into the mikvah. Other electrical appliances that do touch your food do need to go in the mikvah. So let's say, for example, a hot water urn, a George Foreman, a waffle maker. All of these things do need to go in the mikvah. I've never had any problems with it. They'll all say on it, do not immerse in water. They're very careful to write that on the label. I and everyone else I know have dunked them all in the mikvahs, and they've all survived it. I wouldn't plug it back in afterwards. I would leave it in some good Dallas sun for a few days. But once you let it dry for a few days, it generally is fine afterwards. Okay, it generally is fine afterwards. No, not a problem. I was going to say?
What about if it's something plastic, like say like a spatula or like a ladle or something?
Yeah,
like
so plastic is, it's like we talked about last time, the evolving world of kosher to today's world. Plastic, how long has plastic been around for? How long was plastic created? Anybody know? So because of this, we don't know, but it wasn't that long ago. Plastic's relatively recent. Definitely wasn't around in the Talmudic times. It's a great debate because the question, the underlying principle of what needs to go in the mikvah is generally if it can be melted down. Metal can be melted down, therefore it goes in the mikvah. Glass is similar to that it can be melted down, and it also needs to go in the mikvah. Plastic, you can debate, can plastic be melted down or not? It doesn't really melt down, kind of like melts. So because of that, it's debatable. It definitely is not, if it's on the same level as anything else, and it's a debate whether plastic exactly needs to go in or not. But that's definitely not, if you don't put it in, it's definitely not the end of the world. But it is a debate whether it needs it or not. Okay, how do we put something in the mikvah? What's the process? So, a few steps. The first step is, let's say you bought a utensil off of somebody else and it wasn't kosher. So ideally, you're supposed to first make the product, the utensil kosher, before you stick it in the mikvah. If you didn't, it's fine. But ideally, if you have a non-kosher vessel, you should first make it kosher and then put it in the mikvah. Again, if it's not going to be kosher, and even if it's not going to stay kosher, you should still put it in the mikvah, and that's fine. But ideally, you should make it kosher first. Step number one. Step number two is a thing called a chatzitza, which means you're not supposed to have any interference between the item and the mikvah water. Because of that, if you have, let's say, a sticker inside of it that says, I don't know, the price on it, or it says, we're made in China on it, whatever it says on it, you're supposed to remove that sticker before it goes inside of the mikvah. Which also means if it's a little sticky stuff underneath it, try to get that sticky stuff off. If it's a sticker that you intend on leaving on, because it says that it's a very high price tag, or it says, it says the type of crystal. It's crystal, and it has a sticker on it like such and such crystal. That's a fancy thing. So you want to leave it on. If you're going to leave it on, then you don't have to take it off because it's considered part of that vessel. But if it's something you're planning on taking off, you should make sure to take it off before you put it in the mikvah. Now, when you put it in the mikvah, it has to be totally submerged on all sides in the mikvah, which means that if you take a pot or a cup and you put it in upside down, it will be impossible, right? Because it will create an air bubble, an air pocket, right? Take about a cup or a pot upside down in the mikvah, the water will not reach the top of that pot. So therefore, if you have a pot, you should put it in the other way, or on the side, or just make sure that it's able to reach all the different parts of the vessel, and it has to reach all the different parts of the vessel in one time. You can't stick in one half and then turn it over and stick in the other half. You have the whole thing totally immersed with water touching all parts of it at the same time. If you put in, that was what I was going to say before. If you put in a electrical appliance and then you plug it in too quickly and it blows up, so you are not allowed to return this appliance to the store. That's called stealing, because even though the Torah says that you should dunk it inside of a mikvah, if the company says don't immerse it in water and you choose to do so rightly, anyways, you can't come back to them with a broken utensil and claim that it's their fault. That's not fair game. That would be called stealing. However, I've never experienced a problem with it. If you leave it out in the sun to dry for a few days, it is normally fine. The other exception to this rule would be is something that's owned by a non-Jew does not require to go into mikvah. So if for some reason you're scared of putting your hot water in the mikvah, so you tell your non-Jewish coworker, your friend, and you say, do me a favor, can you acquire my hot water urn? And you'll just leave it in my house. I'll use it when I want, if you don't mind. So then that would, since they'd have to do an act of acquiring it, probably picking it up. But assuming they actually acquire it, it wouldn't require going to the mikvah anymore, because what necessitates going to the mikvah is the Jew owning the stuff. Question?
No.
Okay, so that's putting things in the mikvah. The next step is hechsher kelim, which means making vessels kosher. Oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Can we just go to the mikvah for our dishes anytime, or do you have to make an appointment?
Yeah, so dishes are anytime. There's that gate is always, the gate I showed before, that gate is always open, as far as I know. The back gate is sometimes locked. There's two entrances to the mikvah. There's a back entrance. That one they normally open at night when women come. The front entrance is just a little driveway there. That gate from the front is, as far as I know, always open. There's no time that's right or wrong to do during the day. You can do it at night officially. The only thing is, if you're a man, to be sensitive to the fact that at night women will be there, and they probably would appreciate it if you went during the day. But it's not a problem in terms of the immersing of the vessel. And it doesn't need appointment.
And they don't charge you a fee to use that?
There's no fee. It's open. Just note when you pick it up, it's a little hook on top because it's a heavy thing, and if you sit there holding it open and you put everything in, just notice a little hook on top to hold the door open. And then, go whatever you want. Anyone who wants help doing any of these things, you can call me, show you where it is, come with you, help you with the process. Be my pleasure. The next important thing to know is the last thing of the night. It's called Hechsher Kalim. Hechsher is from the word kosher. Kalim means vessels. So making vessels kosher. Let's say you have some non-kosher vessels. So we mentioned before you put them in the mikvah, you're supposed to really make your vessels kosher. You're starting to keep a kosher kitchen for the first time. Your vessels aren't kosher. You have to make them kosher. So there's a lot of different parts to the process. This is definitely not something I would suggest that you go ahead and try now. I'm just going to give you somewhat of an intro to understand the different parts of it. People, when they make their house kosher, what they'll normally do is they'll call Rabbi Klein, who's the head of the DK, and he'll come and assist them in making the whole kitchen kosher and making the vessels kosher and whatever he needs to do. Generally, that whole process I wouldn't even think about on your own. Even the rabbis, when they bought a new townhouse, they brought in Rabbi Klein and he koshered the whole thing for them. That's basically what everyone does. But let's say you're keeping a kosher kitchen, and like we mentioned before, you stirred your chicken soup with a milk spoon, or vice versa. So just to get a general background to understanding how you make things kosher, there's one basic principle that everything functions with, and that is easy in, easy out, which basically means the way that the non-kosher taste got embedded in the vessel is the same way we remove that taste from the vessel. So let's say I cooked a Campbell's chicken soup, which wasn't kosher, inside of a pot. So how did it get cooked in the pot? Through boiling water, right? Through boiling. So when we're going to make this pot kosher, we're going to ideally dunk this pot into a pot of boiling water, and we'll boil the pot. We'll boil those tastes out of it. There's other ways. If a pot can't fit in another pot, you can fill a pot with water and spill it on the side a little bit. These are parts of the process. You'll ask the person how to do it, but the concept is, since it was cooked with water, we make it kosher with water. Let's say it's like a barbecue grate or like a frying pan, let's say, where it's cooked basically with direct heat. It's not cooked with water or with any medium between the food and the utensil. So then we're going to have to make it kosher again with direct heat. This is an advantage of self-cleaning ovens, because self-cleaning ovens get hot enough that it's considered direct heat on the whole area. So anyone who has a self-cleaning oven, those are the easiest things to make kosher, because you just run a self-clean mode and it's kosher. And same thing if you wanted to switch from milk or meat or something like that, self-cleaning ovens are a great kosher invention, although as an aside, they say that it's not great to constantly run the self-clean thing too much. It's not good for your oven. That is not a Torah statement. That is a secular statement. If you're running your that level of heat on it frequently, it could be bad for your oven. But definitely, it's made to do that. It's not going to happen if you did it every once in a while. What types of vessels can become kosher? Not every vessel can become kosher. Metal can become kosher. Glass can become kosher. Wood can become kosher. Stone can become kosher. Generally, the ones that can't become kosher are like earthenware, clay utensils. Those cannot become kosher. If you have those that aren't kosher. Again, every time these things come up, ask a question, because there's a lot of complex rules and stuff. These are just the general background of making vessels kosher. Like I mentioned before, the main way is if you cook things with water, you put it in a pot of boiling water. That will allow it to be the non-kosher taste to go out the same way it came in. The rules of this are similar. Clean it off totally first, and then you wait, make sure it hasn't been used for 24 hours, and then you stick it inside of a pot of boiling water, and then you afterwards put it in a pot of cold water. That's the process of, called hagal in Hebrew, or cleansing it through boiling out. The next part of the process is called direct heat, in which you expose it to a high level of direct heat officially until the item becomes red. Though nowadays our metals are created with alloys that they don't ever really become red, because they're just made to retain such a high level of heat that there's certain temperatures. Again, different things have different rules, so rather than getting into the details, just know that if it was used for direct fire, it would be made kosher again with direct fire. That's basically it. Any other questions on anything we've covered today or other topics or anything?
So, this is kind of just side curiosity. I remember my great-grandmother talking about koshering pots with ashes.
Yeah.
How does that...
So I mentioned just now, anyone who, if I'm saying too much information, you could forget what I'm saying right now. I'm assuming what she meant is, I've never heard of that, but I can assume where it's coming from.
Well, I have a similar thing when I lived in Israel once, and I remember we did something wrong. So what I did is I heated up like a metal pot. No, I heated up a rock, and then I put the rock in the pot.
Right. The reason you put the rock in the pot was because you couldn't put the whole pot in another pot because it was too big. So you heat up the rock, put that rock in the pot, and it causes the water to overflow, and then it hits all the parts of the pot. That's the point of it. If you put a cold rock in, it would cause it to stop boiling before it overflowed. So you intentionally put a hot rock in, so it sustains the temperature of it, and then hits the rest of the pot. That's why you do that. The ashes, I'm assuming, as I mentioned before, that you should clean it off well and wait 24 hours. So what's the reason we wait 24 hours? The reason for that is because there's another rule in Tom, this flavor we've been discussing, that flavor can't survive in a utensil forever. Right? There's some meaty flavor that got cooked into a pot. It's not going to cook in this pot 10 years from now. There's no meaty flavor left there. So the amount it can live for has a 24-hour life period, basically, more or less. After 24 hours, we say there's no real good flavor left in this anymore. So if you think about it, there's really somewhat of a problem, because if you have a kosher pot and you're heating up water in this kosher pot, you're now taking this not kosher spoon, let's say, and you're cooking it in your kosher pot. So it could make your whole pot not kosher now. That's the concern, which would make it worse, not better. So once we wait 24 hours, now we say there's no real positive flavor left in it anymore. The good flavor is basically all died out. So then we put it in the pot now and we say that flavor that came out is insignificant. If you can't wait 24 hours, let's say you're somewhere and it's not possible to wait 24 hours, so what you can do is you can make the water be gross. Like you can impurify the water, that any flavor that would come into this water would inherently not give off good flavor because it would just be overwhelmed by the bad flavor of it. So the example that the Code of Jewish Law uses as a way of making water bad is ashes. So I venturing to guess that the reason why they did that was if they wanted to make it kosher within the 24-hour period, they would probably put ashes in to make it be bad. That way, even if they used a vessel within the 24-hour period, they could. That's probably because they only had like one spoon.
Right.
But nowadays, it's normally not a problem for us to just wait the 24-hour period and then do like that, which keeps it simpler. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, please. Enamel. In terms of what? In terms of making kosher? In terms of...
Like an enamel pot, you can't kosher.
Enamel's hard. I do not believe... double check it. I think enamel is a problem, if I recall correctly. I don't think you can make it kosher. But,
I love these pots, and he says they can't be kosher, and I'm very sad.
Can you get more of them?
Yeah, but...
They're expensive.
It's a loss, yeah.
Yeah, I hear that. I don't believe you can kosher them, but we could double check on that if you want. Okay, perfect. Thank you everyone very much for coming. And see everyone next week. Please take